the state of Arkansas allows you to do that.
I don't know.
There's not.
How many races? Justin, I can't remember his last name now.
You take the lights in the front truck, make sure they're not blue or red.
The encounter does not begin with chaos. It begins with certainty, at least on one side of the conversation. The man at the centre of this stop presents himself with calm familiarity, the kind that comes from rehearsal. His truck carries the visual language of authority. The equipment is arranged to suggest purpose. The badge is worn not casually, but intentionally. From the first moments, the posture is clear. This is someone who expects compliance, not scrutiny. What follows is not an argument, but a slow unravelling. Deputies do not rush. They listen. They let the subject speak, because each answer adds another loose thread. The first crack appears when identity is questioned. The title offered does not align with the function being performed. Civil papers are being served, yet the language used to justify speed, urgency and equipment belongs to emergency response. This mismatch is not trivial. In law enforcement, authority is defined not by appearance, but by jurisdiction, authorization and necessity. None of those elements are clearly established here. As the deputies press forward, the subject's answers grow increasingly fragmented. He invokes emergency management, then volunteering, then certification, then incorporation. Each claim appears designed to fill a gap exposed by the previous one. The problem is not merely inconsistency. The problem is that each new explanation widens the scope of potential misconduct. Wearing a badge while serving civil papers raises one set of questions. Operating emergency-style lighting while speeding through traffic raises another. Possessing handcuffs, radios, and tactical tools raises yet another. Individually, each item might be explained. Collectively, they form a pattern that cannot be ignored. This is where the psychology of escalation becomes visible. The subject does not respond to pressure by simplifying his story. He responds by expanding it. That expansion is a defensive maneuver, meant to overwhelm scrutiny with volume. But trained deputies understand this behaviour. They recognise that legitimate authority narrows under questioning, because it is grounded in verifiable fact. False authority expands, because it must constantly adapt. The stop shifts decisively when the question of law is raised, not hypothetically, but directly. What statute permits the use of these lights? What authority allows this conduct on public roads? The response is not defiant. It is not evasive. It is empty. There is no law offered, no policy cited, no supervisor named with clarity. The absence of an answer is more powerful than a wrong one. It signals that the behaviour was not grounded in permission, but assumption. At this point, the deputy's tone changes, not toward anger, but toward containment. The encounter is no longer about traffic behaviour alone. It is about public safety and impersonation. The subject's vehicle, once presented as a work tool, now becomes a mobile assemblage of misrepresented authority. Each item inside the truck adds weight to the suspicion that this is not confusion, but construction. The Miranda warning marks a psychological threshold. After it is read, the subject's identity fractures further. New affiliations appear. New explanations surface. This is not the behaviour of someone clarifying a misunderstanding. It is the behaviour of someone attempting to stay ahead of the narrative. But the narrative is no longer his to control. The deputies now dictate the pace, the direction, and the scope. Crucially, the deputies do not accuse prematurely. They describe. They point to observable facts. A badge labelled with an investigative title. Civil paperwork unrelated to emergency action. Speed that exceeds any reasonable justification. Equipment inconsistent with the role claimed. This method matters. It transforms suspicion into documentation. Each observation is a brick. Together they form a structure that supports probable cause. The subject attempts to reframe his intent as safety-driven, suggesting the badge and equipment are meant to prevent harm to himself. This explanation fails not because it is implausible in isolation, but because it contradicts the legal reality. Law enforcement identifiers are not protective talismans. They are regulated symbols of state power. Using them without authority does not reduce risk. It creates it. It invites compliance under false pretenses and undermines public trust in real officers. By now, the deputies are no longer deciding whether something is wrong. They are determining how much is wrong. The presence of handcuffs, radios, a body camera, and traffic radar inside a civilian vehicle is not coincidental. It is curated. It reflects intention, and intention is the dividing line between misunderstanding and impersonation. When the subject's criminal history emerges, the context shifts again. Certain roles and certifications are legally incompatible with felony status. This is not a matter of opinion or departmental discretion. It is statutory. Claims that might have been questionable before now become impossible. The persona collapses under the weight of verification. The encounter's power does not come from confrontation. It comes from inevitability. Every attempt to assert authority is met not with force, but with fact. Every effort to appear official is answered with documentation requirements that cannot be met. The body camera, ironically worn by the subject, captures the entire process, transforming his own performance into evidence. By the end of this phase, the deputies are no longer investigating a traffic violation. They are dismantling an identity built on borrowed legitimacy. The subject's authority was never taken from him. It was revealed to have never existed. As the investigation deepens, the focus shifts from what the subject claims to who he actually is under the law. Authority in this context is not performative. It is binary. Either it exists or it does not. And the deputies understand that every accessory, every credential, and every statement must be reconciled with that binary reality. The vehicle becomes a focal point, not because it is unique, but because it is deliberate. Emergency lighting, traffic radar, communication equipment. These are not items acquired accidentally. They represent a visual language that the public is conditioned to obey. That conditioning is precisely why the law restricts their use. When someone deploys that language without authorization, the harm is not hypothetical. It is immediate and systemic. The deputies' questions narrow. They are no longer entertaining broad narratives. They are isolating facts. Who authorized the papers? Which jurisdiction issued them? What emergency justified the speed? Where was the destination? Each question removes another layer of ambiguity. The answers do not converge. They scatter. This scattering is significant. Truth tends to align under scrutiny. Falsehoods fracture. The subject's destination changes. The nature of the paperwork shifts. The source of instruction becomes vague. Even basic details, such as the name of the person involved, remain elusive. For someone claiming investigative training, this lack of specificity is telling. The presence of a body camera on the subject complicates his position further. Body cameras are accountability tools. They signal transparency. But here, the camera serves a different function. It reinforces the illusion of legitimacy. It suggests oversight where none exists. When deputies decide to seize it as evidence, they are not suppressing transparency. They are preserving it. The legal framework tightens around impersonation statutes. Impersonation is not defined solely by verbal claims. It encompasses conduct that would cause a reasonable person to believe the individual holds official authority. Speeding through traffic with emergency lights. Wearing a badge labelled with an investigative title. Carrying restraints. Using police-style radios. Each action contributes to that perception. Intent is inferred, not from confession, but from consistency. And here, consistency is found not in statements, but in equipment. The truck is configured to resemble a patrol unit. The accessories align with enforcement, not civil service. The explanation that these items are deterrents collapses under logical weight. Deterrence requires visibility, but lawful deterrence requires authorization. When felony status is confirmed, the investigation crosses into another category. Certain licenses and certifications require sworn statements regarding criminal history. If those statements were falsified, the misconduct extends beyond impersonation into fraud. This is not speculative. It is procedural. The deputies recognize this and adjust accordingly. The subject's responses grow shorter. The expansive narratives give way to silence or repetition. This is not composure. It is exhaustion. The performance can no longer sustain itself because the environment no longer rewards it. Authority, once assumed, now evaporates under verification. The decision to tow and inventory the vehicle is not punitive, it is procedural. Inventory searches protect departments from claims and preserve evidence. In this case, they also reveal the full extent of the constructed persona. Each item catalogued reinforces the same conclusion. This was not an isolated lapse in judgment, it was an ongoing operation. Throughout this process, the deputies maintain control not through dominance, but through clarity. They explain actions. They articulate reasoning. They document observations. This method contrasts sharply with the subject's approach, which relied on implication rather than explanation. The broader implication becomes unavoidable. When civilians adopt the appearance of law enforcement, they exploit public trust. That trust is not abstract. It governs how drivers yield, how citizens comply, how situations de-escalate. Undermining it introduces risk not just to individuals, but to the system as a whole. By the time the subject is formally detained, the outcome feels predetermined, not because of bias, but because of accumulation. Each piece of evidence supports the same narrative. The authority was self-assigned. The emergency was fictional. The urgency was manufactured. What remains is not outrage, but record. A record of how easily symbols of power can be assembled and how decisively they collapse when confronted with lawful scrutiny. The final phase of the encounter is defined by resolution rather than revelation. The truth has already surfaced. Now it is being secured. Evidence is logged. Statements are contextualized. The subject's earlier confidence is absent, replaced by procedural finality. The deputy's closing actions reflect an understanding that this case extends beyond one individual. It touches on regulatory gaps, verification failures, and the ease with which authority can be simulated. The subject did not invent these vulnerabilities. He exploited them. The presence of cross-jurisdictional paperwork highlights another systemic issue. Civil processes often rely on private servers operating with minimal oversight. When those servers adopt enforcement aesthetics, the line between service and coercion blurs. The law draws that line clearly, but enforcement of it is inconsistent. This inconsistency is what allowed the subject's operation to persist. Certifications obtained without thorough background checks. Equipment acquired without restriction. Public roads navigated with assumed compliance. Each step relied on the absence of challenge. Until now. The deputy's insistence on specifics, names, statutes, authorizations, serves as a model for accountability. It demonstrates that authority must be renewable under scrutiny. It must survive questioning, not avoid it. As the scene concludes, the subject's constructed identity is dismantled piece by piece. The badge is no longer symbolic, it is evidence. The radio is no longer functional, it is seized. The camera is no longer performative, it is archival. What remains is a cautionary example, not of dramatic confrontation, but of quiet exposure. The most significant authority shift in this encounter does not occur during a raised voice or a physical restraint. It occurs when the subject admits plainly that there is no law permitting his actions. In that moment, the illusion dissolves. This case underscores a fundamental principle. Authority is not claimed. It is conferred. And when someone attempts to bypass that process, the system's response must be measured, thorough and unwavering. The deputy's actions reaffirm that principle. They do not mock. They do not escalate unnecessarily. They document, verify, and enforce. The result is not spectacle, but integrity. In the end, the subject's greatest mistake was believing that appearance could substitute for legitimacy. The body camera he wore, the badge he displayed, and the equipment he assembled all served a single purpose: to convince others. But the law is not convinced by performance. It requires proof. And when proof is demanded, performance collapses. The encounter closes not with triumph, but with clarity. A line has been drawn, not by force, but by fact. And that line defines the boundary between citizen and officer, between service and impersonation, between authority and its imitation. As the encounter continues, the scope of the investigation expands. What initially appeared to be a simple traffic stop rapidly transforms into a layered examination of identity, authority, and legality. Each element of the subject's presentation, the badge, the handcuffs, the radios, the emergency lights, is a claim of legitimacy. And yet, legitimacy is not declared, it is verified. Deputies understand this principle. Authority is validated through oversight, documentation, and compliance with law. In the absence of verifiable support, what the subject exhibits becomes suspicion. The vehicle itself is a focal point. Inside the truck lies the visual language of law enforcement, a radio capable of dispatch communication, a badge with investigative credentials, handcuffs that imply restraint authority, a body camera that signals monitoring. To the casual observer, this collection may seem innocuous. To trained officers, it represents intentional construction of a persona meant to convey power. The cumulative effect is more dangerous than any single item. Each piece suggests function beyond lawful parameters. It becomes clear that the subject has not merely assumed a role, he has manufactured one. The truck is not a work vehicle, it is a staged instrument of authority. Deputies begin isolating inconsistencies. The subject claims volunteer service with emergency management, yet cannot name a supervisor. He asserts multiple affiliations, some with titles that suggest professional certification, others that are unverifiable. When asked about specific incidents, speeding through intersections, running amber and green lights, the explanations rely on vague emergencies rather than documented incidents. The cognitive pattern emerges. When questioned, the subject responds with proliferation rather than clarity. Each response is meant to obfuscate, to diffuse scrutiny, yet it only intensifies the perception of deception. The legal implications of these actions become central. Impersonation of an officer is not determined solely by intent to deceive verbally. It is measured against conduct that could lead a reasonable person to believe they are interacting with someone vested with law enforcement authority, driving recklessly with lights and sirens, wearing a badge labelled investigator, carrying handcuffs and tactical equipment. All of these elements establish the perception of authority. Even absent verbal claims, the subject's conduct constructs an officer-like persona. The deputies recognize this pattern, differentiating it from a simple misjudgment or civilian error. At this stage, the Miranda warning becomes a pivotal procedural tool. Its delivery signals a shift from inquiry to formal accountability. It serves both to protect the rights of the subject and to fortify the integrity of the investigative process. Once the warning is administered, the subject's responses begin to fracture. Identity shifts again. New agencies, new roles, and new justifications emerge. Each claim is inconsistent with prior statements, illustrating a fundamental instability in the persona the subject has constructed. This is not mere forgetfulness. It is adaptive fabrication in real time. Under pressure, the narrative cannot sustain itself, revealing the underlying artifice. The deputies do not rely solely on verbal testimony. Physical evidence becomes paramount. The truck is thoroughly examined with each item catalogued as potential evidence. Emergency lights, radios, tactical tools, and even the subject's body camera are seized. These objects are more than tools. They are artifacts of deception, each item a corroborating detail that strengthens probable cause. Collectively, they tell a story of intentional design. The system, through meticulous documentation, ensures that this story is verifiable and prosecutable. Felony status adds another layer of complexity. Certain certifications and legal authorities are incompatible with criminal convictions. The discovery that the subject has a felony record transforms previously questionable conduct into legally significant behaviour. Items that might otherwise be interpreted as eccentric or overzealous, handcuffs, body cameras, radios, now take on an illegitimate dimension. The law is clear. Individuals with felony convictions are restricted in their ability to hold certain positions or carry specific tools of authority. The subject's continued possession and use of these items constitutes multiple layers of violation. Throughout this stage, the deputies demonstrate measured professionalism. They do not escalate through emotion or confrontation. Instead, they apply methodical observation, consistent questioning, and careful documentation. Their analysis highlights the difference between assumed authority and legitimate power. The subject's narrative may have relied on persuasion, implication, and visual cues. The deputies counter with verification, legal standards, and procedural control. The contrast illustrates a broader principle. Authority is maintained through process, not performance. The interaction also exposes systemic vulnerabilities. The subject's access to cross-jurisdictional paperwork, combined with the ability to self-appoint roles with investigative-sounding titles, shows how easily public trust can be manipulated. Civil process service, particularly across state lines, is often privatized and minimally monitored. When combined with law enforcement aesthetics, this creates a situation in which compliance is likely, risk is high, and accountability is diffuse. The deputy's intervention demonstrates the critical importance of enforcement that is both precise and procedural. As the investigation progresses, the focus tightens. The deputies aim to determine not only what was done, but why and how. Each inconsistency is a signal. Who authorized the documents? Which agency sanctioned the actions? What emergency justified high-speed driving? The subject's responses continue to scatter under scrutiny, highlighting a crucial insight. Truth aligns under questioning. Falsehood fractures. The gap between claimed authority and documented reality becomes impossible to ignore. The seizure of the vehicle and equipment marks the operational peak of the encounter. Every item is logged as evidence. The truck is no longer a mere vehicle. It is a container of multiple offences. The process itself is instructive. Careful cataloguing, inventory and preservation ensures that the evidence cannot later be challenged. It also reveals the depth of the subject's preparation. This was not a momentary lapse. It was a sustained effort to appear as an officer. Each item had purpose. Each choice was intentional. The cumulative picture illustrates premeditation rather than coincidence. Psychologically, the encounter demonstrates the limits of performance under formal scrutiny. The subject initially displays confidence, but it is fragile. Each question, each verification request, each evidence cataloguing moment chips away at the facade. By the end, the subject's composure gives way to procedural compliance. The initial assertion of control has shifted entirely to the deputies, whose authority rests on legal verification rather than appearance. The broader implication is instructive for both law enforcement and the public. Authority is not merely perceived, it is conferred, verified, and accountable. Anyone attempting to simulate it without authorization creates systemic risk. The danger is not hypothetical. It exists in traffic flow, citizen interaction, and legal processes. This case highlights how quickly self-assigned power can escalate into public hazard when unchecked. Finally, the contrast between the subject's behavior and the deputy's methodology is stark. One relies on appearance, implication, and improvisation. The other relies on procedure, observation, and verification. This dichotomy reinforces a core principle. Real authority withstands scrutiny. Simulated authority crumbles under it. The encounter is a textbook illustration of that principle, showing how deliberate, methodical response exposes deception and prevents harm. By the close of this phase, the narrative is clear. The subject's claims are fractured, his identity constructed, his equipment curated for illusion. Yet the deputy's response is not reactive but analytical. Evidence is preserved, statements are documented, and authority is restored to its rightful framework. The investigation continues to unfold, but the foundation, the clear distinction between lawful power and assumed power, has been established beyond question.